Thank you guys for coming. I think we got people not only just from Minnesota, but people from nationwide. This group is more or less from Minnesota primarily, but we have monthly meetings and everybody's welcome to join, especially during COVID. If you find our topics interesting, please let me know. Maybe write down your email in the chat if you are hoping to get a link for the recording too, or you have some friends that want the link. YouTube will take probably about 2 to 3 weeks for me to get that up. But nonetheless, we have Erica here, and she's going to talk about her experience doing marathons. She's well versed with diabetes management herself as an educator and has a master's in business administration. So I'll let you start it off here, Erica. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for inviting me and having me present to the group. Good evening, everyone. My name is Erica Bania. I have type 1 diabetes. I've had it for almost 30 years. And today I'm going to talk with you about my experience developing as a runner and endurance. I don't even like to say athlete, but I'll say endurance athlete, and how I've learned to manage my diabetes. So I'm going to call this presentation today Going the Distance with T1D. So let's see if it'll let me change my slides. There we go. So my agenda for today, I'm going to give you just an introduction about myself. I'll kind of break up my running journey into like the early years, kind of finding my pace and then perfecting my passion. I'll share with you just my methodology at each one of these stages of running. Some key learnings that I had at each of these kind of phases of my running journey. And then I'll also share with you just a little bit about the ADA position statement. ADA stands for American Diabetes Association. And then I'll end on questions and discussions. I'd love to hear from other people what your experiences have been with running or other like athletic sports and how you manage your diabetes. I'd also want to divulge that as Brad said, I work in the diabetes community. So I have this great personal experience, but I also have some professional experience as well. So I just live, breathe, and work diabetes is probably the best way I can say it. So, a little about me. I was diagnosed with type 1 in February of 1992. I was 6 years old. I was a very active child all throughout my youth. I did kind of novice running. I was always outside playing. I did quite a bit of equestrian sports, as well as some swimming. I was just a really active kid, always on the move. From age 6 to my early teens, I was on NPH and regular insulin. Who remembers those days? I know those insulins are still around, but can I see some hands for people who recall like those being their starting regimen? I saw a few there. My A1C was frequently above 8, 8.5, probably closer to 9. My poor mother had the joy of managing and worrying about it. I didn't really care too much. I knew it was important to manage. For my early teens and beyond, I was switched over to like Levemir, Lantus, either one of those, plus Novolog. A1C still frequently high, still a pretty active teenager. College, same type of regimen. I was a lot more laissez-faire with my diabetes management in college. It just wasn't as much of a priority as it should have been. The social life, the different living environment, the stress with classes, but also just being more on my own. That was kind of a tougher stage for me. And that led me into developing my first and really only complication with diabetes. I was 23, diagnosed with gastroparesis and intestinal dysmotility. And that was really a wake up call for me. It really kind of caused me to focus a lot more on my management in being more preventative and proactive versus always kind of having a reactive approach. So that leads me into the early years of running. I was in my early to mid 20s. By then, I'd had diabetes for about 15 to 19 years. I started out signing up for different 5 and 10K running distances, more just for fun. Throughout all of this, I've also been an avid cyclist. And so that's also when my cycling began. I kind of did that as cross training, but I'm not going to go into that today. I started focusing more intentionally on exercise. I joined a gym. I didn't have any kind of coaching. I went to some fitness classes, but I just really made exercise a priority. And in doing this, it allowed me to push for longer or more distance with running. There's a picture of me at one of the JDRF1 walks. I didn't really have pictures from back in this stage of my life around running, I should say. So at this stage, I was on MDI, meaning multiple daily injections. I used Levemir twice a day and Novolog for meals. I was finger stick testing, probably not as much as I should have been. My method during this stage was I would like boost up on carbs. I would just carb up. I'd test my blood sugar beforehand to kind of gauge how much carb, but I'd usually always overdo it. I would rarely, if ever, test the blood sugar while running. I just, at that time, didn't want to carry it with me. And my runs weren't all that long. So I didn't think that I needed to take it for a 30 to 60-minute run. I would really use a symptom-based approach. So again, this is still that kind of reactive nature. I would treat if I was low because I could definitely feel my lows. I could also tell when I got really, really high, and I would just shorten my run and get home quick, take some Novolog, and the blood sugar would come back down. I had many highs and lows. Um, I hate to sound discouraging, but many of them ended the run early or caused an end to the run early, but I didn't let that bother me. So these were just some great foundational kind of years for me developing as a runner. So key takeaways during this stage were, if it's something you're thinking of getting into or have had trouble with, some of my key takeaways that I'd love to share with you are always inform people if you're going to run alone. That became a best practice for me. There were a number of times I had to call family or significant other to come pick me up and bring me back because I just couldn't finish the run. Always be prepared. Carry your carb more than you think you'd need, your phone, wear a medical ID. Start to think about that last bolus. So when you last took Novolog or Humalog, when you last bolused with your pump, but also your last long-acting insulin dose, because that can very much impact your blood sugar while you're running. I also learned at this stage that it was really important to monitor more closely afterwards if I did a new or different workout. So for me with running, that meant, did I run a lot faster or harder than normal? Was I doing sprints and then backing off? So like more high intensity kind of training. Was I going a longer distance than normal? Because this tended to really affect my blood sugar differently afterwards. And I had a few surprises with that. Mindset was also a key takeaway at the beginning. So planning ahead is key. Expect that lows and highs will happen, but the key is just planning for them. So this kind of pushes me forward into when I was finding my stride. So this was kind of after I'd gotten more into running, it became a really big interest of mine. I was in my mid to late 20s. This is about 19 to 23 years into my diagnosis. I signed up for my first half marathon. I kind of knew what to expect with blood sugar trends at this point. I was still on MDI. I tested my blood sugar before and after this half marathon. I still didn't want to bring my blood sugar meter with me. It was too cumbersome. I did learn through repeated training that I needed to reduce my morning breakfast bolus and reduce my morning Levemir dose. Oops. Oh my gosh. I just pushed way too many keys. I'm sorry. So I usually ran higher for the half marathons or longer races at this time. And through that repeated experience, that really kind of pushed me towards a pump. My endocrinologist had really pushed it on me, and I kind of dug my heels into the ground. But it was after some of these first half marathons where I realized I need more flexibility and also safety. So I went on my first pump in 2015. At this stage, also with running, I was more focused on time goals, pace, my form, but I still had many highs and lows. So learning though how to change that morning or pre-race insulin dose was definitely important at this stage. So other key learnings were, like I said, that pre-exercise bolus, learning how to carb up beforehand, but also how much carb and type of carb. For me, I started to learn like my optimal fueling plan is 10 to 15 grams of carbs every 4 to 5 miles. But I'd also encourage you to think like, do you need insulin for this or not? I tended to need it. I wouldn't take it when I was on injections, but when I got on a pump, I did. And I'll go into that more later. Um, from here on out, I'm going to use the term microbolus a lot. I've just called it this. I don't think that that's a standard term.
If you don't want to watch this too, I can.
Was there a question?
I think someone just wasn't muted, but I think microbolus is used very often in sugar surfing and everything like that. So I think that's a perfect term for it.
That's one of my favorite terms. So so for those who don't know, or what I'm meaning when I say microbolus is I'm taking a little bolus, not enough to cover the carb I'm eating or for what my blood sugar is. It's probably about 30% of a bolus I need at most. But when I'm active or when anyone's active, you tend to be far more sensitive to insulin. So I would under bolus, and I just call it micro, so like these tiny little boluses. So I started doing this a lot more at this stage. And at this stage also, I feel like when you have repeated practice, you start to know what to expect. And the unexpected will still happen, but you start to kind of develop some consistency and understand how your blood sugars trend. So with this repeated practice, I felt like I knew more of what to expect. So then this will kind of bring me into my next phase of running where I'll discuss more about my marathons. But 2015 of May is when I went on my first pump, and this was life-changing for me. So this really allowed me to increase my distance and time running. The half marathons were tough. It was not a good plan for me to always let myself run high. And it was going on the pump as much as I didn't want to. I can't believe I waited so long. So it gave me so much more flexibility, but also that safety. So are most people in this group on pumps right now? I see some hands and head nods. Yes. Okay. Hi, Nicole. So pumps before, but even nowadays. Okay. So I think I was on this slide talking about my first pump and temp basal. So temp basal, that's a feature where you can just lower the hourly rate. So other pumps may call it temp target, depending on the feature of the pump, but essentially it gives you less insulin for that hourly rate. The pump also then allowed me to bolus while I was active. So I could fuel more appropriately and perform better. And this was even before I went on a CGMS. I also had improved absorption of insulin. So it was just a good transition for me in 2015. So that leads me into my kind of main discussion topic here for perfecting my passion. So this is when I was kind of in my early 30s, 25 to 29 years into my diagnosis. I went on my first pump. It was a Tandem T-Slim. I changed pumps in 2018 to the Medtronic 670G. That's also when I went on my first CGMS. And that was probably even more life-changing to get a sensor. So I didn't have to finger stick while running. And then I also then switched again to the Tandem T-Slim with Basal IQ in November of 2018. That's what I'm on now. But I had the benefit of trying a Control IQ tandem pump. Thank you, Brad, for about a month. And that was really fun to try. I had just had things so dialed in with that Basal IQ that I haven't made the switch on my own to Control IQ. But I did want to share this little screenshot for those who don't use this pump. It's really neat where you can turn on this activity mode and it targets you to 140 when that happens. So this was when I was doing actually a treadmill training run this year. I had the exercise mode turned on and you can see how it's suspended for probably a good half hour there towards the end. And as I was drifting up a little bit higher, I had done, I think it was like an 8-mile interval run on a treadmill. So that was pretty cool. So
26 quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you on control IQ or are you still on basal IQ right now?
I'm still on basal.
Okay, so that picture, that was back when you were using that pump a
Yours.
little bit? Okay.
Yes.
And you can borrow
Yeah,
that.
I
if you
ran it
want
through its
to, if you want.
paces. I tried it out. It was really great. It worked so well. I've just hesitated upgrading. I just like mine with just the basal IQ right now. It works for me really well.
Yeah, you're not alone with that too, because some people like the lower targets, and right when it gets into that sweet spot, lots of times starts cutting off insulin, and you're like, no. So understandable.
Oh, I do see me on 2 screens here. That's so weird. Sorry, people.
That's fine. Or you can stop video on one of them if you want to. It's totally up to you.
There. Okay. All right. So first marathon, 2016. I was on a pump. This was Twin Cities Marathon. So at this stage, I had a ton of practice. I was still finger sticking, carried that meter with me. I tested at the beginning, a couple times throughout the run. That is a hard thing to do, to run and finger stick at the same time. But I had this nice little waist pouch where I stuck all the stuff in there. So I ran like, it was probably more like a run walk when I'd have to do the finger stick, but I did it. I did use a temp basal for about the first 60 to 90 minutes, but then I'd have to turn the temp basal off. So what I have found, and what some research supports, is when the exercise is sustained for, say, over an hour or 2 hours, so a marathon could be 4 or 5 hours depending on your pace, that is a lot of work on your muscles, a lot of muscle breakdown. So that's inflammation, injury. There's a stress hormone response that goes on. And for me, that was more notable, I thought, that I would tend to run higher. And so I only needed a temp basal starting out, but as my body was really saying, hey, this hurts and I'm getting sore, I'd have to turn that temp basal off and then actually do quite a bit more micro bolusing for my carbs after the 10-mile mark. So I would try to fuel every 4 miles. And I would take only about 30% of the bolus needed to cover the carb at that stage. So I finished. That was one of my most shining moments as someone with diabetes. I felt so happy. I had tears running down my cheeks as I saw that finish line. It was really I get goosebumps even thinking about it to this day, for something I never thought I would do, and I had done it, and I had worked really hard to get there. It was just a big personal achievement for me. Blood sugar at the end too, 102. Can we get some, like, what do they call it? Raise the roof for that. I was so proud of that. So I wasn't fast. I was running for over 5 hours, but I did it. So that opened the door for me. I couldn't wait to do it again after that. That whole daunting thought of running 26.2 miles was probably the biggest fear I had, and to do it then and do it and still be standing upright, and also do it safely without going way too low or too high. I couldn't wait to do it again. So continuing to perfect this passion, I signed up for another marathon the following spring, Grandma's. This time I feel like I had it a lot more dialed in. I was still finger stick testing though. I didn't have a CGM. So the morning of that race, I was low. I was 62. I ate 32 grams of carbs, which is quite a bit more than I kind of usually do. I did tend to have more of a stress response at this point, meaning even though I was low, I didn't put it in here, but I did run higher after this. I started to see excursions in glucose the morning of races, just because of the adrenaline that was pumping. So for this race in particular, I used a temp basal starting out and did do a little bit more carb just because I had quite a bit of insulin on board from that morning bolus. Started running. I ate 14 grams of carbs at miles 3, 7, and 11. Didn't bolus for those though, just knowing that I had that active insulin on board from the morning. Mile 10 and a half, I did a little micro bolus. I didn't test at this time. I just kind of thought, oh, I probably need a little something. And this again was just through lots of trial and error or experience and practice in my training runs. But I did do a finger stick at mile 13. I was 140. At mile 20, I was low then. I was 68. So I actually ate 35 grams of carbs. And that kind of freaked me out. I hadn't had a low while doing longer runs like that. So I think I ate 1.5 GU packs. Mile 24, then I thought, okay, I just ate all this carb. I'm going to be done running in about an hour. That carb is still getting digested. So I did take a little micro bolus again without eating anything towards the end of the race. At mile 24, I did 0.4 units. And then tested afterwards, and I was 115. And I got a little faster too. So I, at that point, felt like, wow, this actually works. I can do this. And it was a really exciting moment again.
Can I stop you?
Carried that into that fall then. I did another marathon. And I really kind of did that same method where that temp basal at first, turned it off halfway through, made sure that I was micro bolusing for my carbs throughout. I was still finger stick testing at the time. But at this stage, because I had so much practice, I felt like I could focus a lot more on fueling properly. I didn't have to worry about what's the bare minimum of carbs I need. I could think, I need carbs so my muscles and body can function. How do I just match my insulin appropriately? And it went very well. I actually got a little bit faster. So I was close to that 4-hour mark. 4:06 was my time for this one.
So we got a couple of questions, Erica.
Yeah, sorry, I can't see them on my screen.
No, that's okay. So the CGM, it just wasn't on the forefront of your mind at that time, or what was holding you back from using a CGM a little bit earlier in your years?
Nothing held me back per se. I think I was just kind of, what I'm doing right now is fine. I don't mind finger sticking. By that stage too, I was testing a lot more. So more so than when I was a youth in college. I was testing 6 to 8 times a day. And it didn't bother me. I just did it. It was fine. I think kind of by my mid-20s, I was really focused on management. I had that A1C down. I turned things around after I got that first complication diagnosis. So
And
it
then,
didn't, I just, oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I was wondering, when you're doing your finger sticks, are you so good at it that you're kind of running? Are you going down 2 miles per hour? Are you stopping? How much are these finger sticks slowing you down when you're doing the marathon?
They slowed me down for sure. But I was so determined to keep like a running pace. So here, I mean, like try to visualize this, like pull a strip out and hold it. But then I'm also probably contaminating it with sweat and whatnot. You know, who cares at that point? I'm pulling the meter out and sticking it in there. No, I'd first poke my finger. I'd need that blood sample. I'd put it away. And then I would stick the strip in the meter while I'm running, stick the thing on, then I'd be like holding it and it's shaking while I'm running, and I wait till I see it and then I put it away. But then it was also this balancing of pulling the pump out, looking at it, how do I type in, because you can't just type in, at least I couldn't, what's my blood sugar and how much insulin do I need, because I don't want the full amount. I just had to kind of mentally think, do I need, it really ranges from 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 to 0.5 units is kind of just my go-to numbers. And that's just what works for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the following year then, I upgraded and got a CGM. I got a new pump. It was the MiniMed Medtronic 670G, which has an integrated sensor. This system still required regular finger sticking, but it wasn't a big deal to me because I was really good at finger sticking. This pump was the first closed loop pump on the market, meaning this pump works together with the sensor to self-adjust the insulin to a certain extent. So I actually used auto mode for a month. It just wasn't a good fit for me. I'll go into that in a moment, but I did a 10-mile race using this. I didn't use the temp target, and the temp target targets you closer to 150. It worked pretty well, but I had such an issue with this auto mode, almost under delivering the basal insulin. So when I would finish up the exercise, if I would eat anything like a salad, 10 grams of carb, like something super low carb, I would skyrocket up every time. So it's called like rebound hyperglycemia, not due to a low, but just due to inadequate basal insulin was my experience. So I ended up not using that exercise or the temp target mode. I ended up just not using auto mode after a month in. It just wasn't a good match. So instead I just switched to using that pump where it just delivered my normal settings, but I still had the feature where it would suspend my basal rate. And that really worked well for me. That's called their Smart Guard technology, I think. So at this stage, having that sensor just gave me so much more flexibility and just awareness of how my blood sugar would change. And it allowed me to really master that micro bolusing amount, but also that fueling need. I could kind of judge by how fast I was falling or how fast I was rising, how much insulin I need, how much carb I need. So that was my experience on auto mode. So then I was on this pump and sensor. I felt like I got things really dialed in at this point. So I signed up for another marathon. It was grandma's marathon again. At this stage, I could really focus on my pace and time. Having that sensor just made me not have to slow down to finger stick and just gave me that real-time data. I was fueling at this stage just for performance. All the practice in those training runs paid off. And I also had that same like adrenaline excursion the morning of. And so I had to kind of adjust for that on race days. It didn't happen on any of my training runs, but that adrenaline burst those mornings seemed to always become a pattern. So at this race in particular, because I had like I was in the 220s before I started just from adrenaline. I didn't do a temp basal and I micro bolused right from the get-go. And so that helped me achieve pretty stable blood sugars throughout. I think 220 was my highest. I did come down throughout the race. I don't have the pump picture for that one though. But I actually achieved a little bit faster time. So in like the running community, they say, can you try to get below 4 hours? That's considered like, I think, decent. I don't know exactly, but I did it on this one. So I felt another great achievement and I had good blood sugars for the most part. Yeah, let's do that again. So this was another shining moment for me, just getting that time, because I'll get to this later, but the focus at the beginning was so much on diabetes, right? And to get to this stage where it's like, I have this diabetes, like kind of mastered, I can now focus on running faster, running farther, focusing on things that actual runners focus on, people who don't have diabetes. It kind of just made me feel like, wow, I can do this. So then later that year, I did another one. This was Twin Cities Marathon. So at this stage, it was very similar to the former marathon where the focus was on pace, performance, fueling. I knew what to expect. A lot of trial and error, trial and experience, I should say, gave me confidence. I was still on this Medtronic pump. Probably the biggest challenge with it was it needed those finger stick calibrations, even when it wasn't in auto mode. So I'd really have to time it to test right before I left and just be hopeful that I didn't have a rapid rise or fall. Because sometimes if you go up or down way too fast while on this pump, it'll ask you for a calibration early. Thankfully that didn't happen, but I took that risk of like, I'm not going to carry the meter and just kind of hope that I stay somewhat level. And my training runs thus far proved to be that, proved to follow that type of glucose trend. So so this marathon was kind of my, I keep saying like another big achievement. This was another just really happy moment for me because I qualified for the Boston Marathon. So in like 2.5 years time, I improved from over a 5-hour marathon to a less than a 3.5-hour marathon. And it just was another great achievement for me. I didn't have any coaching. I did some run clubs and stuff, which was helpful, but this was another shining moment. I have a great pump picture up there. I like to show this one. This was my 20-mile training run prior to this marathon. Early on, I had more of this where it's called ping ponging. So like when I first went on this sensor, and I try to avoid this because I found that it really fatigued me to have my blood sugar going down, up, down, up, down, up. Even in this kind of little window that probably ranges from 90 to 180. When I would have runs like that, I would just physically feel crappy. And I think it's because the glucose is like running out of your blood into your cells, or it's not, or that you're getting enough fuel and you're not. And I think that I was just overly sensitive to that. So this particular day, it was a training run in St. Paul. I did it with a big running club and it went well. It went okay. I think just having the peer support was helpful, but I felt like garbage after this. It was just that up, down, up, down. I kind of chalk it up that day to, it was so humid. I think I was dehydrated. So my blood sugars tend to go down, up a lot more. So that's just an example of what that was. But at this stage, I feel like it was happening less, but that was definitely just something I had to deal with and learn, how do I manage this again in the future? How can I best plan for this type of situation? So that leads me to most recent, 2019, my body, I was fatigued and tired. I didn't do any marathons in 2019, but I did, I was accepted for entry into the Boston Marathon for 2020. So I had applied to go. They only select, I think it's 30,000 runners. That sounds like a lot, and it is, but you have to like meet a time qualification in order to go. So I was planning to go in April. I started training in January, but then the pandemic hit. And so what should have just been a 3-month training turned out to be a 9-month training schedule. So it was so much running this past year because they ended up postponing that marathon. It was really uncertain if they were even going to hold it, and they just they just did a virtual option this September. So it was not at all what I expected, but I still did it and was really happy to have trained for it twice and then run it once. So this is me using the Tandem T Slim X2 with Basal IQ, no finger stick testing. So this pump, let's see here. I'm going to get my little picture pulled up here. So for this race, you can see there's that adrenaline excursion. That was like so classic. So that's me getting up in the morning, and this is a solo marathon, but it still just had that same effect of like, okay, I need to run my best today. I need to be thinking about everything, nutrition, carbs, hydration. So I got up in the morning and I had a cup of coffee and it was already starting to rise. So I did bolus for this probably right as it was on like reaching 150. I did a micro bolus and did not turn on the temp basal, started running, and then it just rapidly falls. I did carb every 4 to 5 miles. So that was probably about every 35 to 45 minutes. And I just micro bolused for each one. I found that I needed to do a bolus towards the end. Otherwise, I would go too high as I finished up. So that was a very helpful strategy that I developed through the training cycle of this marathon. And I ended at a 119 there, as you can see, and pretty flat and steady. Yeah, so this one went well. And again, with this, at this stage, I felt like I don't have to think so much about like what's going to happen. I kind of knew what was going to happen through all of this practice, years and years of practice, and just starting small. So I can say I ran the Boston Marathon, but it wasn't quite the same. Nevertheless, I'm thankful to have that on my track record as a runner, I guess. So some key learnings from this stage of perfecting my passion: pump versus injections. I'd be swayed towards a pump. I think it's possible with injections. I think people can do distance and endurance activities with injections. For me, it just wasn't conducive. So finger stick versus CGMS. I would do a CGMS any day. That was probably the most life-changing technology item for me to get. If I had to pick, I think a CGMS and still be on injections versus going on a pump and finger stick, I would hands down choose injections with a CGM. So an integrated pump and CGM system. So this would be like the Medtronic 770G system, the Tandem T-Slim with Control IQ, or the upcoming, I think it's Omnipod 5 coming out, meaning the pumps that automate the insulin delivery based on that glucose system, or that glucose reading, excuse me. So I think these are great. I think if you know how to use them to maximize your glucose control during the run, perfect. For me, at least with auto mode, didn't work as well as I hoped it would. The Control IQ worked pretty well for me. But as Brad said earlier, it just tended to target me a little higher than I wanted. So that's why I just remained on the basal IQ. The system you use is really going to be independent to each person. So that's just my experience. I can't say yay or nay for any of them. It's just kind of each individual's person or personal needs and experiences. Other key learnings, we're really paying attention to how much insulin on board, which would also be called active insulin when you use a pump, or if you're on injections, when was your last bolus? Do you need to bolus while you're active? And if so, how much? That's typically going to be like a learned amount. You definitely probably need less, but to determine how much less do you need based on what you're eating and what you're doing. All these different variables and factors to kind of test along the way. Adrenaline and stress, I've commented a lot about that already. That was huge for me. It may not be for another person. I can tend to be a little more nervous on race days, so that was notable for me. Fueling and hydration, I've commented a bit about that. That could be a whole different presentation about nutrition and performance. I also want to give a shout out to Type 1 Run. That's a national group that we have a local chapter here. That was so great for me to connect with others who had Type 1, who liked to run. I think it is so beneficial for such a solo sport to find outlets where you can do it with other people. You can learn about running, you can learn about diabetes, and do it together through Type 1 Run. So finally then, kind of perfecting my passion, mindset. Expect that diabetes will interfere. I think all throughout my journey in running, I never got sour towards diabetes. I always just thought like, well, it's just, I'm going to go high, I'm going to go low, but I learned how am I going to plan for it? And how am I going to like kind of learn to switch directions if a high or a low or something else wrecked my run, or not wrecked, but stopped my runs, it had me cut it short, changed my running plan. The mindset is key. When you know that it's going to affect it and just embrace it for what it is, I think you overall will have a more positive experience with running or any endurance activity. Also expect the unexpected. So even in these later stages where I felt like I had everything dialed in, there were still moments where unexpected things happen. I like to show this one here, this picture. This was during a training run. Where I was like coasting along pretty well. This is a 6-hour time frame, so kind of think from that like 4-hour point forward, where I was coasting pretty steady, kind of reached my upper limit there, 155, and then just started plunging downwards. This was on a morning training run. This run ended short. I did not feel good because it went low. And so even though I had had so much practice with this, there's still those unexpected experiences or happenings where you just have to kind of learn like, well, this run was cut short. There's a new day tomorrow or a couple days from now, I'll just try it again. So probably one of the biggest takeaways then for me at this stage was, to really develop as a runner and getting to push the distance, you have to first focus on managing diabetes. And as hard as that may be to hear, once you get that dialed in and you're confident in how to manage it, then you'll take off and expand as a runner or endurance athlete, or even just push your distance. And whatever that distance is for you, I feel like that's kind of the key thing, is being safe and steady with diabetes, and getting that kind of mastered up front, taking the time to learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Once you get that figured out, you'll be able to do anything. And I think for me, like, we often feel like we're in a box with diabetes, like we're contained and there's limits, but it's really up to us as to how big or little that box is. And so if you just kind of think about, you know, what are the things you have control over? And diabetes is one of them. Start there, start mastering those skills, and it's going to allow you to expand in really any area of your life that you want to. So with that said, I'm going to wrap up by just commenting here. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. The American Diabetes Association does have a really nice position statement on physical activity, exercise, and diabetes. I definitely didn't read this before I started running, but as I read through it now in my professional career, I'm like, wow, yeah, there's a lot of great takeaways and recommendations in here. So if it's something you don't want to look up, talk about it with your doctor or diabetes care and education specialist, because there's a lot of just great tips as to kind of what to expect with different types of exercise, how to adjust insulin pumps or injections. And it just, I don't know, has some really great kind of best practices for being active while living with diabetes. So that leads me to the end. I'd love to open it up for questions, but also hear from others if anyone else can comment on their experience with endurance exercise, running, cycling, anything else. I absolutely love to hear from others too. So.
Erica, do you use any adhesives to keep it from peeling off or falling off when you're doing a lot of sweating or running?
Rarely. So with the Dexcom, both Dexcom and infusion set have always stuck really well to me. If I see like I'm on day 7 or 8 of Dexcom and I see a little peel coming up on the edge, I'll put one of their overtakes on it. But otherwise, no, that hasn't been an issue for me, knock on wood. Gotcha.
Someone asked whether you ever considered an Omnipod and not having a tube.
I have considered it, yeah. I am so excited for their next system to come out. I am so in love with my tandem pump because of that basal IQ. That suspend feature has been like honestly life-saving at times. And so I can't wait to try it with Omnipod. I really want to work more on swimming and just getting in the water. I can't wear a tandem pump or Medtronic pump in the water. So I'm super excited to try that next. Does anyone in the group here use Omnipod, and have they done endurance things or endurance exercise activities? No? Okay.
So Erica.
Yeah.
It's Chris Moore. Hi.
Hi, Chris.
So I do not endurance like you, but 10 miles have kind of been my highest. And so I've used the pod for that, and I have had to use some extra adhesive. Just, I don't know if it's more the sweating or the weight, I'm not sure. But I do use some extra adhesive when I'm gonna be what I call banging around a little bit more, doing longer runs or things like that.
Great. Do you temp basal when you run with the pod?
I do. Yep, I do. And I haven't, because I'm not doing quite the endurance you are, I'm not eating along the way. So I'm just mainly using that temp basal, and then maybe under bolusing a little bit pre-run for the meal prior, so that I'm starting out a little bit on the higher end.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great.
Erica?
Yeah.
My name is Rick, and I'm a long distance runner too. And I had 60 years without type 1, and then I got it at 61. So
oh my gosh.
I had about 9 years with it. And before I had diabetes, I did a 100-mile run once. So I'm kind of way away from that now, obviously, just learning diabetes and running. But I have a couple questions for you I'd like to ask you. What's your go-to running carb?
Oh, it has changed so much. Okay. So I've used lots of different things. I mean, from your standard.
Have you ever used UCAN?
I've done some UCAN. I wasn't a big fan. I know it's super popular. It was more the flavor. I wasn't keen on. So
Yeah, I agree
I
with
do
you
a
on
lot
that.
of the like Huma gels. Humas are like kind of like almost like a goo, but they're all natural, but they have chia seed mixed in. So they're still somewhat fast acting. And they have electrolytes and some of them have caffeine, but they had like a more sustained effect, I found. So I'll use those. I'll use gluten-free honey stinger stroop waffles or the gluten-free GU stroop waffles. They're all around 20, 22 grams of carbs. That was probably this past year, like for this Boston Marathon I did and the Twin Cities 2018. It was the stroop waffles. I do some of the goos, but they almost were like too fast where they'd be helpful. But if I stopped too soon,
Right.
I would just go skyrocketing up. So the little bit of chia seed, a little bit of protein or fiber, and some of them tend to be more my go-to.
I have a question about how you, when you temp basal,
Yeah.
you said you do 35 to 50. Is that kind of what you said? I think.
My temp basal will be usually 80 to 90%. So reduction of about 30%.
Okay. Then I
Yeah.
have a question. When do you start your temp basal? How
Depends
long
on
before
my, yeah, it depends on the pre-exercise blood sugar. So if I'm running, like so for example, for me, if I was at a 150, I wouldn't turn on a temp basal. If I'm starting out at 80 or 90, I'm for sure turning the temp basal on and likely about an hour before I even start.
Okay.
So
Now, do you ever get a spike after you're done? I always go low at the end and then just hugely high right afterwards.
Definitely.
So what do you do? Do you just take, what I've been doing is like maybe a mile from the end, I'll take just a big wad of bolus. So when I'm done, I'm probably down about 65 or 70, but then I go right up to 150, even with a lot of bolus.
Yeah, I do the same thing, but mine would be more reflective of if I had carb. So if I say I took carb and I even did a micro bolus for it, but then I stopped the exercise within an hour later, I will absolutely run high. So I'll have to take almost the remaining amount of the bolus for that carb, not the full amount, but I'll have to add on another 0.5 to 0.8 units. That's like just for me. So I can't.
So I'm looking at your, this is personal, so you don't have to answer if you don't want, but I'm looking at your micro boluses. Yeah. And I noticed that, I wonder what your regular carb ratio and sensitivity are.
Yeah, so my carb ratios are different for the time of day. They range anywhere from 1 to 10 to 1 to 12.
Okay.
I do a lot of manual bolusing though. That's not a good practice, but if I know I'm going to be active and I enter it into my bolus wizard and it's saying I need X number of units, I'm often self-adjusting that down.
Yeah, you do just
my sensitivity is at 65, so I get 1 unit for every 65 points.
Okay, that helps. Then I can kind of understand your micro boluses. Yeah, it sounds like you do exactly what I do. And I don't know how people can do the auto mode. I don't see how that could work. It just seems it goes off too many times for me.
Yeah, everyone has a different experience. I just have found, and a couple other just peers that I know who have used it, it has been a little troublesome when you're active. Like it decreases the insulin far too much, that when you finish up the exercise, you eat any amount of carb and bolus appropriate for it, and you're just skyrocketing up, and it takes forever to come down.
Right.
So,
okay, I'll quit asking questions.
That's okay.
Wanted to ask there. Thank you.
Best of luck with your running.
Thank you.
100 miles. Wow.
Yeah, I went up to Alexandria. My cousin dropped me off, and I ran home alone with a phone and a credit card.
That is wild. Well, I admire you. Diabetes or not, that is a stellar achievement.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Not from me.
Okay.
Plenty of them. I'm going to let other people, if they don't have them, but I have quite a few.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about your diet a little bit, Erica? Are you kind of low carb or something like that? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Strategy there.
Kind of low carb, kind of moderate. when I'm more active, I need more carb or my body yells at me. I need it for recovery. Like for managing diabetes, I tend to do pretty low carb. So, and low carb for me is probably less than 60 grams a day, but I try to do no less than 40 grams a day. That's just, it's just way too little. So I time my higher carb meals around days when I'm going to be more active. It definitely helps me. So if I know, like, let's say we're going to have pizza some night, we'll tend to make it on a day where I've had more activity, and that helps control it. So I don't try to be too regimented about that, because I don't also like a lot of limits around what I eat, but I have found that doing low to moderate carb does help me achieve better blood sugars. I do more gluten-free, or I am gluten-free. I can't tolerate gluten, so I don't eat gluten. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about diet.
Do you ever use
Hi.
0% on your temp basal? And what's the longest you have if you do that?
What's the lowest percent?
Yeah, have you ever used 0% for your temp basal? And what's the longest if so?
Rarely do I need a 0%. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just suspend it completely and then just turn it back on, because it'll start yelling at me when it's turned off completely. So that's almost a nice reminder. If I have it, rather than do a temp basal of 0, I might forget to check it and look and like, oh, I should take the temp basal off because I'm drifting upwards. So the longest I would do it, I'd maybe start it beforehand. Like there'll be some days where I'm, say, finishing up at work and I'm in the 80s and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna, run 6 to 8 miles after work tonight. I should temp basal an hour, even an hour and a half beforehand. So I start drifting a little higher, closer to maybe 100. And by how much I reduce it just really depends.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I guess it was a couple of questions, but I was wondering it too. You kind of went into your college years and stuff, and you haven't said much about your A1Cs, but thank you for being, vulnerable and kind of describing some of those A1Cs. Obviously, that's your personal information. I thought, when I first met you, I was like, God, this girl's got probably like 5, 6s. She's perfect. She's doing these things. So it was really awesome for you to kind of shed the light, about, I think we all go through struggles, but just kind of curious if you'd be sharing your your A1C range for the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, so last 5 years, I've always been less than 7. My most recent, I was a 6.1. And that's with minimal hypoglycemia. So thank you, basal IQ. Before that, I would go low a lot more, and I think that would skew my A1C down. I want to believe that. I don't know if my doctor believed that. He just heard I was running marathons, so thought that was why it was so good, which was part of it. But I think I was going low quite a bit. Now I don't go low quite as much. When I do, it's really notable, though. I feel it. If I get down in the 40s, it's not a good thing. Whereas before, I was really used to being in the 40s. So so I've been under 7 for a while. I was, as I said, kind of that age 23 is when I got that diagnosis of gastroparesis. And I was just like, I was also working in a hospital at that time and started seeing people who had diabetes not under great control. And I think that also scared me. So I turned it around pretty quickly then. I started testing the 6 times plus a day. And at that point, I think turned my A1Cs around to lower 7s, and then they just kept coming down further and further. Certainly getting into this profession helped as well, just seeing that, like, there's colleagues and peers and friends, and it's possible to manage it with just a little bit more attention than what I was giving it.
Awesome. Anybody else questions? Feel free.
I have a question. So what I've noticed being on the tandem pump, and I'm kind of wondering just for people that are using the Omnipod, because I like the idea of being able to do it with my phone, control it with my phone, and not have to drag it out all the time. But I noticed with the T Slim that, I don't know if it's because it's more like a computer, that my insulin can get too warm in it, especially if it's, if I'm in temperature extremes. And I like to take like the hot baths and the hot showers. And I'm wondering if I switch to an Omnipod, if that would make things worse.
You're probably asking
So-
for some other people in this group, right? Because I
Yeah.
think Erica's used the Omnipod. I guess I take it into a sauna. I took it into the sauna yesterday and it likes to heat up and I try to put my hand over it to kind of keep it cool. But I think it definitely, it really depends person to person. I think that's something maybe to try that we could try on the side. I think they do a sampling for like a month too to kind of see how it works, but it's kind of tough because yeah, you don't know if you're gonna have to change it again. All of a sudden it's a little bit of trial and error, but I don't think there's exact science about it getting a lot warmer and stuff for each and every person.
I've used Omnipod and Medtronic, and it's about the same, I think. The thing I have more trouble with hot showers is the sensors. I get real low sensor readings after a hot shower.
I get the opposite.
I wish I got that.
Too.
I'm not low.
Kelsey just said she doesn't have any issues with the hot baths and the sauna. Lots of times I get a big spike afterwards, and then after like a cold shower, I get a really big drop too. So
What I do with hot baths, and I don't do it every night, but I really like them, and I have an Omnipod, is I try to wear it on my arm if I know I'm going to take a hot bath, because then it's not like soaking in the hot water. Or, somewhere where it's just a little bit more out of the water, if at all possible. Or I do it like at the end of the time when I know I'm going to switch it that day anyway, and then I'll switch it right after I'm done. So.
Thank you.
how do you carry things, Erica? It looks like you got a fanny pack there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the one in this last picture here is, it's called an amphipod belt, and I tighten it so it's really tight against me, so it's not flopping around. And I actually wear my pump clipped to the outer little strap of that. The problem with that is I can't feel if it's vibrating, so I just get in the habit of picking it up every 3-4 miles and checking my Dexcom. But I can fit the Stroop waffles are nice, and the little like Huma gels I use fit in there really well because they're flatter. And then there's little side pockets to like stick my keys in. My phone fits in there. It's a lot. I mean, I won't lie. It's a lot of crap I'm carrying. Like, I wonder how fast I could go if I didn't have that on. And the few times I've run without it, it is such a liberating feeling. So it's like, this is the literal diabetic fanny pack I'm wearing. Like, it's kind of this extra load you just learn to run with, but that's one of my favorites. When I'm cycling, I have a pack on my back, and sometimes I'll still wear that just to carry extra with me. So that's handy.
I wear hearing aids, and my telephone beeps me when my T-Slim goes off.
Oh,
Maybe
nice.
there's some sort of Bluetooth earbud you could wear that attaches to the Bluetooth on your pump.
That's a great idea, Michael. I do have the app now. I turned the notifications off because it annoyed me, but I should try turning it on. That's a really great idea. Thank you for sharing.
With Dexcom, if you have a iPhone, you can just say, "Hey Siri, what's my glucose?" And the Dexcom will say it to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's another great tip.
You don't carry your phone though with you, right? That would be too much baggage.
I take it.
Okay.
Yeah, for safety and just music.
Oh yeah. Duh.
Yeah, more for safety though. And I don't use the Dexcom app right now. I just get it on my pump. So I'm just constantly checking the pump.
Gotcha.
Everyone's different. So
was gonna say,
What they're-
hopefully soon Tandem gets that FDA approval for the phone, but I hope that doesn't make you upgrade to the Control IQ, but you could also get it from looping with the Omnipod if you wanted to try that.
Oh, yes, I've been thinking a lot about that.
Mhm.
Hey, nice reading, Michael.
That's the T Connect going to my iPhone, and that buzzes to my hearing aids too.
That is super. I love
Al-
that.
Always be prepared. Think diabetic first and think anything else second.
Any other questions or shared experiences?
Where do you, when you do your real long runs, do you change your site or do you always have the same spot for your site for running?
I changed my site. I do a lot of the similar things. So I put my little Garmin map on there. So I do like the Minneapolis lakes through Edina. I'll take the parkway. So if you're familiar with Minneapolis, there's a really nice parkway along Minnehaha Creek. Have
Yeah,
some
I meant
nice
your
designated
insertion
running
site.
trails. Okay.
I meant your insertion site for from your pump.
Oh,
Do you have a spot you like for your, when you have
Oh.
a run that's real important to you, do you have a certain spot you use for your sensor and your site?
No, I don't. Sorry, I misheard your question.
Oh.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Nope. I just try to keep the pump on the same side as my Dexcom because I wear my Dexcom in
Right.
my arm.
Yeah.
So
You're into your novice cycler. How's your swimming? Have you thought about triathlons at all?
I've thought about it and I'm thinking no. The idea of swimming in a lake, yeah. I'll maybe start with the pool once I get the new Omnipod.
Erica, thank you so much for this presentation. Why is it that you wear Dexcom on the same arm as your pump or same side as pump?
Just to optimize that connection. So sometimes that pump can have a harder time reading across the body when I wear it on the arm. So even if my infusion set's on my left side, but my Dexcom's on the right, I'll just make sure I have the whole pump itself over on this side, the tubing going across my body so that it has a good connection throughout.
Cool, cool. Yeah, thank you so much. This is really inspiring. Hope to follow you
Thanks.
someday. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie.
And Erica and me are both tandem pump trainers too, and we're taught to tell people to keep it on the same side because it does lose frequency. It doesn't like to go through the body lots of times, and I've seen it with many patients. So it's a weird nuance that some people never run into it, but a decent amount of people do. It's a great question.
Even having my pump in like a back pocket or something, it doesn't want to read the sensor.
Going way back to when you're carbing while you're exercising. And you mentioned that a variety of different carbs that you've tried and it has changed over the years. But I was wondering, when you carb like that, you're not having strictly glucose or sucrose carbs. You're having something that has fat and protein and fiber in it also. Now, I would think that when you're exercising that you would have carbs and protein and not much fat and not much fiber. Is that an accurate statement?
I think for the most part, yes. Ideally, fueling is mostly carb, maybe a little protein and fat for more sustained energy. Certainly for any activity, something that's just straight carb is going to be the best treatment for a low. But some of those products I mentioned, like the little Stroop waffles they make these specifically for exercise. They have a little bit of protein, a little bit of fiber, and then I'm thinking 2 to 4 grams of protein and 1 to 3 grams of fiber, a little bit of fat. The little Huma gels, it's spelled Huma, they have chia seed in them. So they have a little bit more protein and fiber. Those have been a favorite lately. I think there's some other similar products out there and they're all natural, gluten-free. So correct. I want to say the primary nutrient is going to be carbohydrate with minimal amounts of fat, minimal fiber. Probably the most common secondary macronutrient would be protein in those types of products.
So in other words, gum drops and fructose or glucose tablets are not what to use when you're exercising.
Well, they are if you're low, and they could be good for fuel, like needed fuel right now. But I think when the activity is prolonged, you may thinking about products that have a little bit of protein in them to provide you with more sustained fuel later on in the activity.
Yeah, I was thinking of when you exercise your muscles and you're building muscle mass, it tends, sometimes your muscles get overstressed and break down, and then your body goes into a repair mode, and it would need that protein to rebuild those muscles that you may have damaged during the run or during your exercise.
Absolutely. That for me, and probably for others here too, can comment that the recovery is kind of a whole different game here. It's pushing the electrolytes, the fluids, the protein so that those muscles can properly rebuild, for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or other experiences to share?
Erica, I think you talked about it a little bit, but what I find really, really frustrating is that it's not always the same. So sometimes, you know, you exercise and you go down, and sometimes you exercise and you go up. Or sometimes I'll exercise and it'll start to go down really fast and I'll stop, and then it'll just start to rebound right away. Do you notice that with your runs, or is it because you're exercising for such a long period of time, it's more predictable?
Yeah, it's kind of a little of both. I don't have an exact answer like it's one or the other. I do have to say that with lots of experience, I feel like it's gotten a lot more predictable, but there's still going to be those days where it's like, why am I just plummeting, or why am I skyrocketing up for really no apparent reason that I can think of? Those are some of the days where I decide to like end it early or modify what I'm doing. And maybe if it's I'm coming down really quickly, I might stop running and just walk a little bit, or sit down and eat some carbs, wait 10 minutes, maybe do some stretching to kind of just in that moment, what's the safest thing I can do for myself, but also so that I'm taking care of myself as number one. I can't even quantify how often that happened to me in the early stages, but even more recently. It still happens, and it's part of it. But I think the key is just planning ahead, but also learning to modify the type of exercise you're doing or the amount of time you want to spend doing it. No, there's always another day. You can try it again.
That's awesome, Erica. I think this is the biggest turnout we've had in a long time, and a lot of people are pumped for this. Once again, thanks for putting yourself out there. Erica is an educator, and I can't recommend her more when it comes to the Twin Cities area around here. If you're looking at someone who lives it and breathes it too. So she's a wonderful educator, and hopefully she'll be working her own program here pretty soon with that Master's in Business Administration. I hope she continues to move up in that. And she'd make for a great speaker, of course. So I'm hoping this gets a jump start.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for having me. This was really great to speak with you all and share a bit about myself, and also hear from you too. So I appreciate the dialogue here at the end and throughout.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And if anybody has some other topics or things to throw at me and stuff, I'm always open for that. Other speakers, we're always looking for more people, and we do this once per month. It's always nice to have your inspiring stories when it comes to it. Yeah, and we don't have anything yet for next month, so please let me know your thoughts, what would be beneficial to talk about, discuss, who to speak. If you got somebody, please let me know. So thank you, Erica. I guess all I can speak for is I ran probably 4 miles. It was the longest I've ever done in my life. And then I decided a week before a half marathon to join a half marathon trail run with my brother-in-law. And I was like, I could easily beat sub 9-minute miles. I think I ended up going like 11 minutes and stuff. And I was destroyed for the next couple of days. So I don't recommend that, guys. I recommend doing the various training. I'm just a big procrastinator. And so it's tough to jump into that. And I still haven't done a marathon yet. So that's pretty amazing, Erica. And thanks for sharing your inspiring story too. So
Thank you. It was my pleasure, honestly.
I have one last question. You didn't mention anything about injuries or, muscle fatigue or, tendons or, body wear and tear.
Yeah, it was significant. I don't recommend 6 marathons in 3-4 years. That was a lot on my body, but I was so excited to do it that I didn't prioritize the rest as well as I should have early on. Now I feel like I have a much better balance of that, but it was very, very obvious when my body was recovering and inflamed. I'll just say that my blood sugars would run higher. So if I didn't prioritize rest and hydration and proper nutrition, I was sore. I had a hard time doing it. So it was profound. I did have injuries, quite a few. I had a lot of physical therapy, acupuncture, massage, muscle soreness, but I also had some nice Achilles tendonitis and plantar fasciitis throughout. So yeah, it kind of goes with the territory, a little bit too much on my body at times, but this past year and a half, it's been a lot better.
I think that would be a good topic, Brad, what she was just talking about. When you have diabetes and you are trying to up your exercise, about the recovery and what happens when things start to hurt and, what to do about that.
sounds good. Maybe Erica part 2 eventually. Awesome. Well, great questions, guys. I think we're gonna wrap things up here. It's gonna take me a little bit, but I'll try to post it up on YouTube, get the link out to the various groups that I sent it out to, so people can watch it if they weren't able to make it. Thanks once again to Erica, awesome presentation. Thanks to all of you for coming too. I appreciate your participation, great questions. And so we're gonna sign off here. Take care, have a great night.
Bye.